We're recording. All right, so we're live. It is Wednesday, July 13. Today, one of my first cousins is having his 60th birthday. He lives in El Paso. Big hand to Juan Carlos. It is 2:01, and we have a great show. We have a great guest. But before we get rolling, where is our John Sibley Butler with some music?
Put a little handle in today. How's that?
Very nice, Johnny. I see, John, that a lot of things going on, and I'll get to the summary later after we say hello. But it looks to me like you're in football mode. You're yearning football. Seems like it.
Well, I'm not yearning it, but it's coming. Whether or not I yearn it or not, I tell you, it's in the air here in the great state of Texas. Whether it's the Dallas Cowboys or the Texas Longhorns, but there's a lot going on in the world. Washington, D.C., the National Science Foundation, all of a sudden has initiatives on work and the mobility of work, people not working where you want them to work. And now that the workers have more, quote, power, where will they work? So I was looking at a National Science Foundation revolving around that issue. I mean, what will the workplace look like in the future when they say that the workers can work anywhere? And then, of course, as you know, we're going through Texas with this 110-degree weather. But I want you to know this, that your grid has held up. And so far,
God.
Your grid so far has held up. And then, of course, we have the stock market that's going on. And, the investments, I work with a lot of venture people. I was online this morning with a company from Israel, sort of looking for funding. And of course, this is the time to do it if you have it, but it's a lot going on. And then we have the election going on that never stopped, right? And then we have all of the mass shootings that's going on. But more importantly, people are wondering, what will the economy look like in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Llewellyn King, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. It's a beautiful day here in Rhode Island, also known as East Texas, to John S. Butler. I noticed that John S. Butler, John Sibley Butler, also known as Johnny and other things on the police blotter, is suddenly interested in employment. This has got something to do with your retirement, that you may have to go out and get gainful employment. So different from the life you've lived all these decades?
Well, actually, I'm all set, What I have to do is make sure that no multimillionaire fall behind.
I'll tell you a story about it. But anyway, things are well. The world is a very troubled place. It always has been, but the trouble is most acute at the moment. We have this inflation. It's going to be with us for the best part of 2 years. I think it will fall back below the 9%, which it has just reached in the US. There will be some mitigation in the price of energy. And the market, as I always say, will adjust. People will do without things, and more supply will come to market. But there will be a lot of pain during the period of adjustment. We're heading into some unknown world with energy supply, and it's not a pretty picture. We've discussed it on this program in the past, but I'm reminded that if we're going to make our goal of reducing carbon to net zero by 2050, we're going to have to install a great deal of solar power, wind power, unknown new sources to compensate for lost gas, perhaps, and for lost hydro in the West because of the drought there. And there is no mechanism for bringing the solution, which is nuclear power, to market. There is no mechanism. The government says it likes nuclear, but it might as well have a ventriloquist doll saying it, because the real lips of the government are not moving. There is no plan. There is no policy. There is no mechanism for taking new reactors or old reactors and building them. In addition to that, we have lost incredibly, unbelievably, and yet truthfully, the ability to build large nuclear plants, which means that we have some danger of not being able to tackle any major engineering project. First step needs to be to find out why both here in France and in Finland and in the United Kingdom, the ability to build nuclear plants, which we had in the 60s and 70s, has somehow disappeared. You would think we were asking for the building of the pyramids, not for something that we've had ongoing. So it's a very difficult time. Electric supply, which is something I'm sure we'll be talking about, is going to be utterly vital, especially as the country heats up. And there also concomitant will be a dangerous dependence on electricity in the absence of any competing fuel. If we lose electricity, we very soon the people like Johnny and his friends in Texas with their guns will come after us in the north with our food and our civilization.
Wow.
Powerful. That's powerful. Let me go to our guests and say hello real quick. John Savage, how are you, sir?
I thank you, Andres. Pleasure to be with you
Brilliant.
today.
Tell us where you are today, John, and maybe a little bit about the weather and what are you up to these days?
Well, I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm not far from Llewellyn. And
another East Texan.
Yeah, that's it. Right. And we are not yet armed up here to defend ourselves in case we need to. But I am been retired officially for about 2.5 years, 3 years, but have continued to teach into retirement. I started a book with a friend, Derek Reveron, who was at the Naval War College, on cybersecurity. We both were on Governor Raimondo's Cybersecurity Commission here in Rhode Island. And our book is going to be published by Cambridge University Press. We're in the final stages of preparing the book.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you. For those that are listening and watching and don't know Dr. John Savage, let me just quickly give you all the rundown. He's, as he said, retired from Brown University. He's an Wang Emeritus Professor of Computer Science at Brown University and a Jefferson Science Fellow in the U.S. Department of State. Many accolades in his storied career. He, really went to MIT, got his PhD there, and then decided to work at Bell Labs for a while and seemed to have invented and had a lot of fun in the late 60s, creating all kinds of things that eventually became a lot of the things that we use in computing. He's not disclosed many of those. Maybe he was doing work for the CIA or the NSA. We don't know yet. Maybe we'll find out. And he is a fellow of many things, including a life fellow at IEEE and a Guggenheim fellow. And we are delighted to have him. Look forward to discussing all the work and expertise that he has on things like computational complexity and VLSI synthesis in theory and parallel algorithms and theory and scientific computation and reliable computation and unreliable components and computational nanotechnology and efficiency cache management on multi-core chips and IO complexity, and obviously his latest focus on cybersecurity, which is probably the biggest thing that is going on. So let me dive into this, John. And again, we don't want to get you in trouble with all your non-disclosures and your past works and help with the government, but seems like this cybersecurity warfare is something that nobody's taking seriously outside of the government, which they are every day, and perhaps utilities and mission critical holders of infrastructure, which they do every day. But it's clearly a warfare that is being unleashed in, in front of our eyes. How serious are we in this digitalization of the planet, and where is cybersecurity warfare at, in your opinion?
Well, we're not engaged in cyber warfare, thank God, because we could do a tremendous amount of damage to each other's critical infrastructure, particularly the electrical grid that was mentioned. But there have been many steps taken to try to address the challenges that nations are facing and dealing with international threats. There is been several sessions, many sessions held by the United Nations. They formulated a group of government experts on information and communication technologies. And they have produced a set of norms. They have norms, about 11 or 12 norms that they hope that governments will adhere to, and they look promising. But the US government has been active through NSA, the National Security Agency, and the Cyber Command in particular has been promoting what they call defending forward. They apparently are working with other nations to not only to help them improve their security, but also to learn what techniques and procedures are being used by potential adversaries, such as the Iranians, the Russians, the North Koreans, and apparently have been particularly successful in helping the Ukrainians in the early phases of the war that was launched against them by the Russians. So I don't think we are at enormous risk right today, but we do need to be on guard.
Yeah. So I find something fascinating. This is going to dovetail for John Butler. When I look at ransomware, a lot of people talk about it. It's really focused primarily on the small, medium-sized companies, people that don't have the sophistication and obviously, the training of the human beings to click on the link and unleash all the malware. But it is a $20 billion business. I mean, talk about a new business model. Let me see. I can hack your computer. What should I do about that? Should I shut you down? No, I'll just hold the ransom for a little bit, ask you for money, you pay me, and then I release it back. I mean, who would have thought that something like that could happen in the 21st century to the tune of $20 billion and growing very fast? John Butler, what do you think?
I think what's interesting, what John talked about is we used to be just concerned with countries, with nations, nation state, military. And with the advent of the servers, and then of course the cloud, every enterprise now is concerned with that issue. So the large firms in America, whether they're IBM, whether they're Dell Computers or whatever have you, have the same problem that the United States have when it comes to ransomware. So what has happened is that crime, as we know, is everywhere. So crime has moved from bank robbing, if you will, to the letter that I would get to send me this because I am now in prison from Nigeria, and to the whole idea that we can now ransom your entire system. And this is why whatever we do in the business world now, we're very, very aware of security. So when I had computer science, which was called logic in the 60s when I was in college, I say this, John, that computer science graduated from Aristotle's logic to computer science. And we could put all of the speeches in logic notations. What has happened then is that computer science has taken us on a very, very interesting ride where the most important variable now is security. For me and you, it's the security from our credit cards, from somebody stealing our house, from doing these things. Another thing about computer science is they are becoming social scientists. They are really getting to all of the data that they have. They have no theory, but they're predicting the movement of human beings. So my question to John is this. John, since you have entered, and congratulations on retiring. I am retiring as of, I will become emeritus as of the August, and do a lot of great stuff. And I have 2 books that I've started. But how do you see the movement of computer science and in the future, and how can it solve this problem that businesses have that the United States used to have all along?
Well, let's see. This is not a new problem, is it? Crime has been with us forever.
Right.
When I was on Llewellyn's show, the White House Chronicle, I observed that back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, there was a bank robber by the name of Willie Sutton, who was very famous. He was interviewed by a journalist who asked him, why do you rob banks? And his answer is a well-known joke. He says, it's not a joke, but it was, well, that's where the money is. And that same mantra applies today to cybersecurity and to ransomware. These criminals, the ransomware criminals, are not really interested in ransoming you and me and the rest of us on this show. They're interested in ransoming essential services for which they believe there's someone who can pay the ransom that's demanded. So they look for the big guys or for public services that are really essential. The way to address problems like that is to be prepared. You need to do backups. You have to exercise using your backups, restart, perhaps once a day to make sure you know how to do the backups so that you can secure yourself, so that you're not beholden to these companies that have locked everything down. But we have a whole of nation problem here. The problem is so serious because the technologies of networks and computers are everywhere. We use them for social media contact. We use them for business, personal affairs, etc. The government runs on computers. So we have to work together. The conundrum we face is that the networks are largely privately owned. The computers the same. So government doesn't have much leverage. We used to regulate the electrical industry, did we not? And now we don't. So we can't demand things of the electrical industry to protect it. We have to rely on local jurisdictions to do that. And the local politicians are not always of the same mind. And the world we live in is complex, as illustrated by the fact that the electrical grid in the United States, that Llewellyn was referring to, consists of something like 3,300 different utilities. Mm-hmm. And we have, it has been said of the electrical grid in North America, it is the most complex machine ever built. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens when somebody attacks the grid and takes down several different substations, for example? Your viewers may know about the Metcalf incident that occurred in 2013. Yep. Where at night, some gunslingers shot holes in something like 17 different transformers, and the oil that was used to keep them cool leaked out, and they had the transformers had to be shut down. This station was supplying electricity to San Jose, to the Silicon Valley, basically. Mm-hmm. And the Federal Electrical Reliability Corporation, FERC, did a study subsequently and found that there were 9 substations, which if they were offline during a period when there was a high demand for electricity, that the entire North American grid could have been taken down. Now, the problem with bringing the grid back up after it's been taken down is that you have to bring generators on one at a time, and it's a very complex process. And so result can be you can be without electricity for weeks, if not months. And as Llewellyn was suggesting, that would create a problem of serious national importance. So we have to work together. but this whole subject is not is approachable. We need to have economists who work with the computer scientists, with the policymakers, who understand what market incentives can be used to incentivize people to keep, and companies, organizations to keep their computers secure. They need to understand what best practices they should use. You need legislators who put some teeth into these issues. It's a complex process, but it's doable. As I said about the Llewellyn's White House Chronicle, the banks, which were the subject of robberies for decades, are now more secure. We don't see headlines in the newspaper that tell us about these major robberies, major thefts, because they've taken measures to make them secure. And I think the same principle applies today with computers.
Got it. Llewellyn.
Yes, John, I was wondering, is there possibly, it's a general thesis of mine, a general assumption that there are no simple solutions to complex problems until the problem is so complex that only a simple solution will handle it. If you cannot have your teeth all repaired, you may have to get dentures. And we saw this in aviation. We had all this problem of security on airplanes, which we solved by locking the cockpits. But it took us about 40 years of hijacking before we decided if we locked the cockpit, the hijackers couldn't get in there. Is there some similar overlooked, simple solution to the very complex issue of cybersecurity?
I think it all comes down to being very aware of your environment. There is an employee of the National Security Agency, Rob Joyce, who used to be head of their Tailored Access Operations Department. This is the department which breaks into computers owned by other countries. And he gave a talk, a public address in January of 2016, in which he got up and he said, I'm a little uncomfortable speaking to you here today because normally I only speak to senior people in government. But I'm going to give you some tips on how to protect yourself from people like me. And then he proceeded to run down a list of steps that you should take. And the first one that he mentioned was you must know what software is running on your computer systems. You must know what hardware you have. If you find you have software that's not been used for a long time, get rid of it. You should monitor your environment to know what software is running. If you have a piece of software running, which if you could determine that it was never ever run before, you should not let it run. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are what are called reputation services that you can use today. You can take a program, you can compress it, it's called hashing, and then you can use that small, short signature and send it off to an organization that has been assembling lists of these signatures of software that is known, and they can tell you whether or not this is problematic.
But John,
measures like that you can take.
But John, those seem to be, for the layman, very complex. It's a little bit, saying it to me is like saying, well, if you exercise more, you could perform on the pommel horse. Maybe, but unlikely. So I wonder, isn't there a simple solution? It tends to be when you get expertise, and your expertise is enormous in this area, probably as much as is concentrated in any human brain. This is your world. But for the rest of us, this is a foreign country, a strange, forbidding, unlikely place. And we really will never be able to mount the kind of hygienic approach, the kind of computer hygiene that is needed. So there will always be chinks and vulnerabilities when you have a lot of people using a system some of whom are incapable or just unwilling to clean up after themselves.
Well, let me
Oh.
push my distinguished colleagues, Llewellyn King's question.
Something's coming.
What if? Can you imagine with me, John, that I'll start a company like the old days. It's all done by mail. I contact people by telephone. All of the records are secure in a drawer rather than digitized. Can you imagine with me a company that goes back to the old days and say, look, we're not going to do games anymore online. We're going to do checkers. We're not going to do games online anymore. We're going to shoot marbles. Do you think that generations have passed that if I were to start a company, any kind of company, an insurance company to say, it's not online, you will be serviced in the old ways. We have a record of you on a note card. So consequently, we are back to that kind of idea. Do you think that can be in the future as a unique kind of company?
I don't know. I'll tell you that there are people who don't want to confront the new technologies. Before I fully answer your question, Johnny, I want to respond to Llewellyn. Llewellyn, the folks who need to be concerned with security are not the average person who buys a computer in a store. It's the vendor who's selling you that product. If you are using a service, you're running a big corporation, a university, for example, you need professionals to do the kinds of things that I was describing. But on the question of novelty and whether we should throw back to the past, I will tell you that new technologies bring with them, as you know, many advantages. I'm reminded of the story that was told about the advent of the automobile in New York City. The locals were enthusiastic about the automobile. And the reason for it was they had a terrible pollution problem that they hoped that the automobile would address. And it was horse manure. There were many horse-drawn wagons in New York City, and they created this problem. So the locals were looking forward to the advent of the automobile, not knowing, of course, that it brought with itself new problems. But I'm an optimist. I think that we can address these problems. It's challenging. We've confronted problems like this with new technologies many, many times in the history of humankind, and I'm sure we'll do it in this case as well.
Let me chime in real quick, John Savage, about several things. So, cybersecurity and computer systems have been always focused on, internet protocol, the making connectivity of humans. We're moving to a world of everything being digitized, and today, the number of things connected, cell phones, computers, people interacting with each other is roughly, let's say, 10 billion things. Is going to grow to 300 billion things in the next 20 years. What do you see in terms of the fragility of the internet itself, the way it was designed? Are we able to morph into this 300 billion thing, managing everything, our robots, our destiny, our connected vehicles, sensors everywhere, cameras, they issue tickets, people going to jail automatically? I mean, is cybersecurity going to be a crazy paradigm of ransomware on steroids, about all kinds of things? What are your thoughts?
No, I think we're going to continue to use computers and networks, and I think we'll do that because we'll be making them more secure. Mm-hmm. You can make a cell phone that's really simple, that doesn't have any apps on it whatsoever. It's just a communications device. If you need to, if the security problem to get very bad, that's what we would do. I think that we are going to develop specialties that will help us address the many problems that exist here. I would love to see economists spend more time studying how we use the internet, psychologists doing the same, psychiatrists. We know that there are problems that are emerging in society that seem to be due to social media. Senator Sass of, I think is North Dakota, I think, wrote a book on the loneliness epidemic that he has identified. Where does that originate? Does that originate with young people who are hiding behind their monitors, playing games, cruising the internet? I think it does to some large extent. So how do you counter that? Well, you work at bringing young people out of their homes and engaging them in sports, perhaps. In travel, a variety of things. You have to find a whole variety of different measures to address these problems. We have to take the problems seriously. If we do, I think we're going to cope.
Yeah, I agree. There are books that I think the sociologists would do it. I don't know if the psychologists, because they're so individual on the brain now.
That's right.
I think you're exactly right. I think that when we talk about people, about what's going on, the question is an old one. How will you socialize?
That's right.
What does the family look like? Was the family in your life? And you know, right now we know, for example, that if you look at America, we know that you know, that we have established steps. You finish high school, you know, and then you can go to trade school, or you can go to college, or you know, or start work, or start a business. They're all honorable. But if you do certain things, right, where life is going to be tough, whether it's having a child early, it's just tough. We know that. And I think what people are leaning toward now is that the internet itself, right, the internet itself could have social consequences. And this is why the computer scientists are now becoming social scientists. That is, they're creating the algorithms and the data to look at the movement of people, to predict suicide, to predict what people do, and to predict crime also. Because the great thing that the computer revolution gave us was data. And with data on human beings, we can now better predict what they'll do in the future and how they matriculate themselves through life. So I think you're exactly right. And I think all disciplines, including computer science, have gone into the social physics, if you will, of human beings and the implications of just staying online. So I can tell my students, you know, who are your friends? Well, I have 92 people online. They're my friends. They've never met them. So I think
that's very hard for sex if you've never met them.
Well,
the online side. Johnny, no doubt, will explain it to us. I wanted to go back to the matter of security and the electric grid. Maybe we worry too much about cybersecurity and not electric security. The grid is vital to the society. It's vital to modern civilization. You cannot run without it. Computers, everything, cannot pump gas, do anything, get water, flush the toilets, etc. But maybe we're looking at this too much as a cybersecurity challenge and not as an electric supply challenge. And it would simplify itself if we change the question, saying, how can I make the electric system more secure? One component of which might be cybersecurity, but there are other parts of it. I just wonder what philosophically, John, what you think about that? Are we looking at this the wrong way?
Well, let me say this, Llewellyn. We have some major security problems with the electrical grid that have nothing to do with cybersecurity.
Well, you used the Metcalf example of shooting. That's nothing to do with cybersecurity.
No,
but it's a security issue.
For me, as a cybersecurity person, I am concerned about all those things that supply, that are the computer networks, which is power, electrical power. I worry about supply chain issues, which means that components and software that we put on our computers might be compromised by agents abroad, from which we've acquired these pieces. But I'm also concerned about the electromagnetic pulse. You know what that is? There's solar flares. These are major particle ejections from the surface of the sun, which happen naturally. In 1859, there was the Carrington event. It was a solar mass ejection that hit Earth head on, and the communication system that we had at the time was the telegraph system. And this consisted of pairs of wires running between telegraph stations, many of them very long. And these wires had currents induced in them by the solar flares, which stimulated the Earth's magnetic field and induced currents in these long wires. That led to fires, forest fires, because of arcing to the ground. It led to desk fires, fires and papers on operators' desks. And we learned that therefore we are at risk of bad solar weather, they call it. Well, today, what's at risk is the global positioning system, cell phone systems, in fact, electronics in general. So I asked myself, Llewellyn, what has the electrical power industry done to protect themselves against this hazard? In the US, as I understand it, nothing. In Canada, they understand that they should put in breakers to short circuit wires that would have large currents induced in them. So I think that the problem arises with the people who are running the grid. Unfortunately, as I said, the grid is not regulated, although we're very dependent upon it. And in my view, it should be regulated for all the hazards that might exist to the grid, cybersecurity hazards, as well as electromagnetic pulse hazards. And by the way, it isn't just electromagnetic pulse hazards that will threaten the grid. You can spoof the GPS signals that these grid operators use, which they put in service. They used to all have what's called electronic, they had to, I'm drawing a blank on the atomic clocks. They used to have atomic clocks to synchronize their grids together with all the other subgrids in North America. And when the GPS system emerged and they realized that atomic clocks were on board every one of these 30 GPS satellites, they could use those in lieu of a local atomic clock, making themselves susceptible to spoofing of the GPS signals.
So you're describing a world in which you invent and then you invent to reinvent to protect what you've invented.
Of course.
There was a senator years ago who said to me when I was covering the budget, and he said, well, I've given $3 million to these scientific fellows. Who's from Louisiana, one of Johnny's Sibley butlers. Senator Ellender, remember him?
I do.
Well, he said, I don't know if I should give them any more money. What do you think, Mr. King? I gave them $3 million, then they want $9 million to find out what they learned with the $3 million. Well, the security issue is somewhat the same. I would mention there that we have had John Wellinghoff, who was chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, on this program, and he is in favor of a system where the grid can break itself into small, defensible or abandonable entities, rather than have the grid, the massive grid, so that every, say, 5 miles or 10,000 people, there would be a breaker, and the grid would be a safer organization or a safer machine, if you will.
I agree with that. I think that you have to find, once you find you're dependent upon a particular technology, and then you learn that has unanticipated consequences, your duty ought to be to find remedies, remediate those vulnerabilities. And we have so much value in our computers and our networks that we should not be abandoning them. We use them for health and safety reasons, and we should continue to do that.
Well, John, you said something interesting. You said, what have the electrical companies done? What have the utilities done to secure themselves? Absolutely nothing.
That's right. They haven't done enough. And what's the problem? The problem, I think, is that we Americans prize success, which often translates into wealth. And if your goal is wealth, doesn't lead to health of your systems, personal health, medical health. We're all in this boat together. Those photos that have just come in from the Webb telescope show that we're a small group of people living on a little planet all by ourselves, circulating our star, and we need to learn to be charitable to one another, to be caring. We have to view ourselves as being in a common enterprise, and we should go forward with humility, it seems to me, but also with confidence. We can address these issues and we can retain the technologies that we've invented.
Yeah, I think that's good. Speaking of solving problems, I just saw the run across the screen that certain airports will limit the number of people who can come through.
Right.
Right. So is that not solving a problem? Well, as Llewellyn would tell you about himself, he's trying to be humble in every way. But it's very, very
you
difficult.
Kidding?
As the country western song said, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way."
I think you're talking about yourself, Johnny.
But my question, John, is
the sun transference here.
Yeah, John, how would you regulate? How would you talk to the utility industry? It's pretty interesting, given the quote crisis that we had in the country and maybe in the future. How would you regulate this?
The first thing you do, I think, is you recognize that we are all humans and we have our cognitive biases. We have our cognitive limitations, but you got to bring people together and start with those people who are the most influential, who are most highly regarded, it seems to me. So get together with the leaders of the big electrical grids and persuade them that they should get together and lead an effort. They should acknowledge that it's going to cost them something to make their grids more robust and put in the breakers and subdivide the network if necessary in a national crisis. And but if they have to, somebody has to lead, and I think you need to start with the most influential, if you can, and persuade them that they should take a collective responsibility for this.
We might have that person online. Let me be the host for a while, Mr. Andreas. You have heard the case against the utilities about them not doing anything. Given that you created most of the lab, what do you think about those comments? What should you do? How should you take the leadership? Can you hear me? Are you there? Uh-oh, he's frozen out. Oh, wow. Andreas is frozen.
We've lost Andreas.
He is frozen. Well,
he thinks I have difficulty with the computer.
Well, John,
I bought the computer that Andreas told me would solve my problems, and I can't work it. And this is very interesting, though. I like the idea that you have, John, and I think it's very John Savage, and I think it's very interesting, and that is the role of engineering in the human condition, that we can engineer out any problem if we do it, if we let engineering at any level, in any part of the human endeavor, engineering is the solution, whether it's engineering a new electrical system or engineering a defensive system or even a social system. During the energy crisis, we talked quite a bit about engineering solutions, and even Jim Schlesinger, my friend, talked a lot about people engineering, trying to get people to work at home, which has now come about because of technology, not because of energy economy. But I just find that very encouraging, the idea that engineering is the answer to so much.
Yes, but well, Andreas, while you were frozen out, so to speak,
Yep.
John made the comment that there was no leadership, that the leadership among the utilities have not taken on the whole idea that they should defend their own utilities.
I think that the industry would have a different opinion on that.
Huh?
I think the industry will have a different opinion on that because NERC instituted in 2009 a new regulatory regime, and there's all this NERC critical infrastructure. We're on level 7 now, and while the utility industry is not controlled by anybody because it's not a nationwide thing, it's a statewide thing. There are standards, there are fines, $10 million per incident when there is a misimplementation of the standards. And so, I would say that the grids are, you have operational technologies running on operational networks that are not connected to the internet. And that is probably the best way to maintain all those systems. I continue to believe, though, that the challenge that we're heading into is a challenge that we're going from managing, mostly human beings connected through the internet, doing things, tweeting, Facebooking, texting, what have you. And now we're going to connect 300 billion things to everything. And how do we do that in a safe way and in a cyber secure way? And I'm not so sure that we know how to do that. I don't think we have been in that pool of water ever before where 300 billion things are talking and connecting everything, and lights on and off and cars come and go, and how do we manage that? And so that was one of my early questions to John in terms of, do we need to reimagine the internet? Do we need to break down the internet into multiple networks? How do we maintain credibility and really scalability into something that is beyond large?
Well, Andreas, the way the internet has been structured, it does have a structure. We all need an IP address in order to communicate over the internet. Mm-hmm. And there are what I call autonomous systems that we use in order to acquire an IP address. Mm-hmm. So these people maintain routers, and they control what communications comes into their networks, and they can control to some extent what is leaving their networks. So there is a structure there now that can be used as a starting point. There are problems with the internet which are recognized. The routing software that's used is based on trust. So if the way the system functions is, if you are an autonomous system, you get a number, and you from IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Association, and then now you can talk to other autonomous systems. And what you do is you send out, when you have a new group of IP addresses that you've allocated to your clients, what you do is then you tell the world that you've done this. And the way you do it is you send an announcement. The first string in the announcement tells the world that this is autonomous system such and such, 42, and that you're announcing a block of addresses. When another autonomous system receives that announcement, what it does is it changes its routing tables so that when they're about to send a packet with an IP address in this new block that you have just announced, they will know where to send it. So your autonomous system is going to receive a message which consists of a string of autonomous numbers, autonomous system numbers. The first one will be the neighbor who sent you that announcement. The second one will be the neighbor who's of that neighbor, et cetera, until you go back to the source. So there is structure there. You can build on that, and you can build on security of this system. There are lots of proposals on the table to do that kind of thing. So I'm optimistic with respect to this issue, but it does require will. When Llewellyn cited the example of airplane hijackings and how it was solved with secure cockpit doors, it took a long while for the airlines to say, oh, darn it, of course. Okay, we'll do it. We have not wanted to spend the money on these hardened doors, but we'll do it. And eventually you have to get the electrical industry, you've got to get the entire internet community to agree, yes, this is a problem. Yes, it's going to cost us money, but we are going to do it. It may take multiple crises to get to that point. I would hope not. I would hope that we'd have some wisdom. What I would argue is the captains of industry who are capable of paying themselves vast sums of money, put a little bit of that aside, please, and use it for some of these problems.
Good advice. Good advice. So go ahead, John. Go ahead, Llewellyn.
As we go to security, we also give up freedom. So even with Llewellyn's example, I would get on an airplane and all the kids would run up and look at the pilot seat. And then you wonder how many of those kids would like to become pilots now. And so we can secure ourselves, but with every security feature in the real world, we also give up a degree of freedom. I don't think that's true, however, in the internet world, excepting that I have to make sure that my internet is secure. So remember that in a larger world, whether it's an open university or an open library, having to just walk through the door rather than walking through security, we give up a lot of individual freedom when we really lock ourselves in a jail.
I agree, but that's a price you pay if you have a completely unregulated society. If all of us can do whatever we want, whenever we want to, we have chaos. And our ancestors understood the need for norms, social norms, right? So that you treat each other with respect. You go into a store, you treat the person who is at the cashier with respect. You don't, what do you get? You get bedlam. You get people carrying guns and shooting at each other. So as the world gets more complex, because there are more of us, we have to think about governance issues. How do we govern ourselves? How do we do that on a social level? How do we do that in a local level, at a state level, internationally? We have to get agreement between countries on how they're going to help each other address security problems. There is a treaty that was introduced in Europe, the cybercrime, the computer crime and commission. I forgot what it's called, but there are steps. UN has been involved. The European Union has been involved. The OECD, et cetera. We have to solve these problems, and we have to agree that they are collective problems that need help from all of us.
Right.
So John, real quick, what's your thoughts on the role of artificial intelligence in this new world order of cybersecurity? How is it going to be used by the bad actors, by the good actors? What are your thoughts of what is AI going to play into this role of connecting 300 billion things?
All right. So artificial intelligence is a branch of computer science. We'll start there. We computer scientists usually write software programs, and these are instructions to a computer that say, do this, do this, do this, make this test, compare these two things. If you get the answer yes, go do that. If you get the answer no, you do this other thing, and then repeat. So these are the basic operations that you find in software. AI emerged when it was understood that some problems are really hard to specify. If I want to write some software that's going to look at an image of Andreas Cavallo, Llewellyn King, and Johnny Butler and decide which image is associated with each of you, well, how am I going to do that? Am I going to write some software that say, look at eyebrows, look at the distance between the eyes, the distance between the nose and the chin? How am I going to do that? People found that very difficult. But along came these individuals who said, we know a little bit about biology. We're able to model neurons. And how do you model a neuron? You take these wires, you put voltages on them, and you feed them into a device which sums them up and then puts the result through a nonlinear function. Instead of output being proportional to input, the output is non-proportional, it's nonlinear. And with that, they started experimenting, putting down layers of neurons that accept inputs from the outside world, a second layer that accepts inputs from the previous level, et cetera. And they found, surprisingly, that there were problems that they couldn't specify accurately enough to write software that they could solve using these neural networks. And when that first emerged in the 50s, it was thought to be extremely exciting. And then the AI people overpromised, and the federal government, when they heard their first predictions, they started pouring money into artificial intelligence. And then when they realized that these guys were blowing smoke and they couldn't achieve the objectives that they had laid out for themselves, they went through the AI winter. They got punished by the agencies that wouldn't fund them. But then around 2000, some innovations emerged on the part of some folks in Canada, I think it was, who demonstrated that you could make neural nets work, and that set off an explosion of interest. Mm-hmm. This is an example of a new technology, just as the computer and networks were new technologies, and you're going to have many unexpected consequences. For example, it has been discovered that there are what are called adversarial inputs. You can train a neural network on the images of the five of us, and then somebody can come along and take one of those images, tweak it just a little tiny bit, and cause Johnny Butler's image tweaked a little bit to look like Llewellyn's, for example, okay? And classify the image as Llewellyn's image. This has been shown, they can do this kind of thing with neural networks that have been trained to recognize skin lesions as either benign or malignant, and change a classification of benign to malignant or vice versa, okay? Mm-hmm. Why does this happen? The AI community really does not understand. Now, when you're going to build an autonomous vehicle that's going to run down a road without the driver touching the steering wheel or the brakes and the controls, and it is going to use its cameras and LiDAR to observe the road and use that as a means of guiding it through this space, you're should expect unanticipated consequences. It's already known that Teslas, with all this gear on it, driving down the highway and passing by an electronic sign that has the stop sign flashing on it, will cause the car to stop. Okay. Now, do you want to put your trust in that technology today? The answer is probably not. You should keep your hands on the wheel if you don't need that. There are parts of your car which will determine if you're within lane or not, and warn you if you were about to drift out of lane. That's great, wonderful, you should do that. There's like radar in your car that will sense the distance between you and the car in front of you and keep you back and apply the brakes if necessary. That's wonderful as well. But AI, one has to be careful with it, in my opinion. It's got a lot of promise, but it also has many hazards.
Right.
John,
One last question real quick, John. What are your thoughts of quantum computing?
Well, quantum computing involves working at the inserting information into the spin of electrons, working at the very tiny levels. Quantum is susceptible to disturbance. For quantum's computer system to operate, you have multiple bits. They call qubits for quantum bits. And these things are supposed to be so close together and so at rest that they can assume any one of a large number of different states and in effect search through the space. However, maintaining coherence between these qubits is very difficult. So people have resorted to using error correcting codes. The error correcting codes require many, many, many more qubits. Today, the maximum number of qubits I think we can work with coherently is 53. To protect against to break the security of the RSA encryption scheme is going to require several thousand, assuming that you don't need to do error correction. If you have to do error correction, it might take 10,000. We are nowhere near that. We're talking about having 400, 500 qubits, I think, in a few years. That's about it. So I'm not worried about it at all. The one, and also the US government has led an international campaign to identify quantum computing resilient encryption methods. And they have identified 4 right at this very moment, just in the last couple of weeks, that they believe are going to be resilient against quantum. And they're going to then now do a world test to see if they can verify which ones, if all of them are workable, if not. So I'm not particularly excited about that.
Yeah.
that's very interesting. I want one last question. Again, it's a rather large one. What do you think about the monopoly issue? We tend to see something we have never seen in the world before. That is a very few number of providers dominating a huge amount of the global intelligence in terms of time. And of course, clearly that's Facebook, TikTok, etc. We've never seen anything like that. We've never had so many people read the same newspaper, ever. We've never had so many people listen to the same broadcast, ever. And suddenly we have a new kind of global monopoly situation, which seems to have no natural breakdown. There seems to be no competition that is reasonable, that changes that. So a given amount of information becomes the global norm. Everybody knows the same thing because they got it from the same source. What do you think about that? Will we break the predisposition of the internet to monopoly?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's my short answer. My longer answer is, what did Teddy Roosevelt do? Didn't he bust the trusts, as the monopolies were called? He did. He was of the Roosevelt family. He was a wealthy man, apparently, but he understood the hazards associated with concentration. So what we have to, that's what we have to defeat concentration as well. We have to encourage variety. And, you know, we humans love variety, don't we? We love to do new things, travel.
Well, we do and we don't. It's very complicated. We are oppressed by too much choice and we love variety. So it's a complicated one. You know, it's a lot easier when you used to buy, when there was one camera, a box Brownie. I'm indicating some age here, but I actually read that. When there was simple choices, a car was called custom, and that was the car. Now you can get 20 varieties of the same model, and people do find that in a funny way oppressive rather than liberating.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I remember in the 50s when the automobile industry decided that to increase sales, I guess, they put fins on the cars.
Mhm.
What did they do? It was done for variety's sake, I think, and for no other reason.
Well, Llewellyn knows that variety to me is a $20 bill versus a $100 bill.
Is this indicating a predisposition to a certain kind of criminality? The classic criminal would rather make $10 dishonestly than 20 honestly, and the mega criminal would obviously rather make $10 dishonestly than $100 honestly. That is, in fact, I've observed that in various people who, in life and in all sorts of situations, think do you know somebody who can put the fix in? And when there was no need for the fix. I said the door was open, a simple question. And the two things that distinguish criminals, I'm telling you this because you're going to have a lot of leisure, Johnny, and I don't want you to get into trouble. The two things are, one, this inclination to do it dishonestly, but the other one is a very poorly developed sense of cause and effect.
You're talking politicians or criminals? I don't know which one you're talking about.
I think that it is a very fine line, and we'll have to ask the distinguished professor to use some artificial intelligence to establish where the line lies.
My colleague from Rhode Island is on a roll. He's on a roll. My colleague.
Let me interrupt real quick to remind our audience and everybody, including John Savage, that who is now invited to attend Digital 360 Summit. Our conference is coming up. We just received news that CPS Energy is taking a major sponsorship to the event. We have 7 sponsors so far. We have a great number of speakers, and obviously the talent here will be in force. Don't forget that we are having a sumo wrestling match between Llewellyn King and John Butler, which will be televised live for the world to see. I can't wait to see that in person. It's going to be magnificent. And I can tell you that we're delighted that we will be surrounded by many of the logos that you see on the screen, and a reminder of the work that we're doing at Texas State, which covers all the topics that we're discussing. And the labs are getting built. And by September, there will be several labs up and running that you'll be able to see and touch. And thanks again to Texas State for sponsoring this magnificent show that we do every Wednesday. Final thoughts, John Savage, other than coming to Texas on September 6th through the 9th, what's ahead of you in the next months? Publishing, a book tour, what else is coming up?
Well, I haven't lined up any book tours yet. I have this book that I'm writing with Derek Reveron is my 4th. And I did approach a bookstore at Martha's Vineyard, where we have a summer home, about my book on the complexity of computing, and I didn't get any takers. So I'm hoping that I'll have a different result this time. I couldn't figure that one out.
I can empathize. I've published 41 books and nobody cares. So
You're living off the royalties, I imagine now, right?
No, I don't. I don't make a dime.
I have 12 books and everybody cares. Come on.
So final thoughts, Llewellyn or Johnny?
It's been good.
I think that it's a very interesting time, because on the one hand, we have this paucity of leadership and we have these international problems. On the other hand, we are reminded by the Webb telescope and by other things how creative we are, how amazing our engineering is, how far we have come, or by the speed with which we produced a vaccine for COVID. We have these two forces, the force to be stupid and ill-led and ill-directed, and the force to do amazing things that has enabled more people to live better on this earth than have ever been alive before. It's worth bearing both in mind.
Yeah.
I think we're in the computer age, image and the age. And I think that, as John talked about neural networks, I think biology is coming up. We've learned so much about biology in the sense that the network, the biological network, a physical network, they look about the same. A computer network look about the same. We're learning from disciplines that allow the country to go forward, and at the very, very center of that is our scholars in computer science. So it was good having you, John. I learned a lot, and I'm going back and read all of your books so I can
Good.
also.
Okay, well, thank you all. It's been fun.
We appreciate you, John Savage. We'll be in touch soon. And John Sibley Butler, take us away.
Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're special in every way. I can't wait to look in the mirror, 'cause I get better looking each day. To know me is to love me. I must be one hell of a man. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble, but I'm doing the best that I can.
Bravo, bravo, bravo,
A good
bravo.
controversial song right out of Texas.
John, it's been very, very interesting and wonderful to have you on the broadcast.
Yes.
Really
Yes, sir.
super.
Yes, sir.